We thank you for being gracious unto us as the living people. Lord, it is your mercies that we are still alive. We have seen many of our families, our relatives, friends, and colleagues being taken to the cemetery, and yet you have spared our lives. And so at this hour, we wish to show a heart of gratitude for what you have done for us. Bekungekho nto Nkosi eyingcwele ebinqabile okokuba Nkosi nathi masibe sisekho emhlabeni. Kodwa Nkosi kungenxa yokuvuma nokuthanda kwakho. Lord, we are continuing with what we started in the morning. We are celebrating a life well lived, a life of a warrior, a life of a person who left a huge legacy. And so at this moment, we bring unto you ourselves and also the program directors and the leadership that is present, starting with the president of the African National Congress, who is also the president of our lovely country, South Africa. Siza kuwe Nkosi eyingcwele, sisithi ke Nkosi ngalo elithuba asilibali nokuthandazela Nkosi family yakwaMaxeke, Nkosi eyingcwele. Siza kuwe somandla, sisithi ke wena njengoThixo wenza Nkosi into enqabileyo kokuba amaxesha amaninzi ke sibe nethuba lokucelebrate umuntu ongumama, ngoba Nkosi kuyanqaba kusoloko kuvama kucelebrate umuntu oyindoda. And so we thank you, Lord, at this moment, at this juncture, that we are to celebrate this extraordinary woman, a phenomenal woman, a woman who was able to lead when it was unfashionable to do so. And so, Lord, we thank you indeed for such a life. And so at this time, O Lord, we bring our prayers as we also pray that you continue to spare our lives against the COVID-19. Lord, we pray as well for the vaccine, that we may also be protected as well. And so sizakweke somandla sithi ke thabatha lithuba phakathi kwabantwana bakho ukuze Nkosi enamandla wonke lo msebenzi wesizandleni zakho. Nkosi ke sithembe wena, masingaze sidaniswe. OKristu Inkosi yethu. Amen. Friends, before I leave this podium, I have been asked to do a short devotion. If I was going to preach, I was going to use the book of Judges, chapter 5, from verse 7 to verse 9. The book of Judges, incwadi yabagwebi, sahluko sesesihlanu, ukusuka kula verse yesixhenxe ukuya kwi verse yesithoba. It reads thus follows. Villagers in Israel would not fight. They held back until I, Deborah, arose, until I arose a mother in Israel. God chooses new leaders when war came to the city gates, but not a shield or a spear was seen among the 40,000 in Israel. My heart is with Israel's princesses, with the willing volunteers amongst the people. And this is the word of the Lord. May God bless his word now and forevermore. Amen. Mr. President, and the entire protocol of the movement and also of the country, I will use just verse 7b, which only says, until I, Deborah, rose. Ndadamna njengo Deborah ndaphakama. This is a song of victory by a woman who led Israel during the wars against the Canaanites. I will say 2 or 3 things and then I leave the podium. This woman was a judge. This woman was also a military leader. This woman was also somebody who had a gift of being a prophet. But also, this woman was fearless when confronted with any situation. As we celebrate Umama Maxeke in this 150 years, I am reminded of this adage that says, when you educate a woman, you educate a nation. But when you educate a man, you educate an individual. But let me take it further. When a man stands up, you must know that sometimes it's mainly about feeding an ego. But when a woman stands up, you should know that a moment of crisis has to be averted. I am saying this because when you read this scripture, Deborah says, until I. There were men, and one of them was called Barak. But all of them were afraid of going into a war with the Canaanites. And so a woman had to stand up to avert such a crisis. And also I submit this afternoon that many a times we as men, it's about eloquence and charisma. But most of the time when a woman speaks, it's about substance and content. During this moment, when Deborah stood up, it was a kairos moment. A moment when a leader had to present herself or himself. And so it's either Deborah had a choice as well of going behind the scenes or of standing up for the nation. And she chose to stand up for the nation. If we had time, President, I was going to speak about few women who are coming from Africa and South Africa in particular. Firstly, I was going to remind us of a woman from Angola called Mbandenzinga, who was a sister to a king. When the Portuguese attacked Angola, and his brother, who was a king at the time, committed suicide, this woman was called upon to stand up and fight for his nation. And history tells us that what she did, she took 2 women who were her sisters and said, we are going to stand up and fight the Portuguese. That's the first woman that I was going to talk about. The second one was the grandmother of Zimbabwe who led the Shona nation. Even there, I was going to show us that in times of crisis, in times of war, we see women being able to stand up. If I come to South Africa, I was going to talk about Queen Mantatis of the Tlokwa nation, who was able to lead the nation when it was unfashionable, leading a 40,000 to 60,000 strong Sotho tribe in the early 1800s. She became the first woman to lead the nation because at that time, a crisis had to be averted. I was going to talk also about Queen Nandi, who was able to empower his son so that his son may be able to lead the nation. Sometimes we give so much accolade to the son called Shaka, and yet somebody brought her up. And so I was going to say to us, women, when they are given the rightful position in history, we see and read a lot of what they have done. Until I, Deborah, stood up. Because at that time, somebody had to go to the war. Somebody had to stand up for the nation. Somebody had to fight. Somebody had to say, let's come together as the nation. And she goes on to say, I as the mother. And so today we're celebrating a mother who was able to say when she got a scholarship to go to Wilberforce, she made sure that others as well are able to be empowered. Because sometimes when a man gets into the space, it's all about us. But when a woman gets into the space, she thinks of the children. And so at this moment, when we celebrate the woman, we're saying unto ourselves, we are here because of Mama Maxeke. Before Tata banikhalazele xa ndisuka apha, ndifuna ukuthi nje kuno besingafunda lukhulu kulo mama emva kwemini nje. Okokuba nathi sizalwa ngomama. Okokuba nathi sinendawo ekumele uba masiye kuyo ngenxa yomama. And so namhlanje xa ndivala le devotion, ndizothi kuthi Mama Maxeke made sure okokubana it is not only about the aspect of politics, but also the aspect of spirituality. At times, we lose it when we do not have the spirituality. You may be a great intellect, you may be a great leader, but if that leader's soul is empty, if that leader's soul is vile, if that leader's soul is corrupt, then the nation will be fallen by such vials. And so this afternoon, when we remember this extraordinary woman, I am also calling for the spirituality of the nation. What is our spirituality as the country called South Africa? Because at the end of the day, some of the things that we go through, they call for us to engage in a spirituality of bringing together the nation, but also a spirituality that will say, we were formed at Viwook in the Methodist Church, and therefore our journey cannot be a good journey without the presence of God. May God bless us now and forever. Amen.
Enkosi kakhulu mfundisi. Thank you very much mfundisi. Amandla. Afuneka nditshintshe nje la ndawo ba abanye benu bese beguquka. Viva ANC, viva! Viva ANC, viva! Viva SACP, viva! Viva SACP, viva! Viva Kosatu, viva! Viva Kosatu, viva! Viva Sanko, viva! Viva Sanko, viva! Malbongwe! Malbongwe! Anivakali kodwa size ngomntu olikhosikazi. Malbongwe! Malbongwe! Roar young lions, roar! Roar young lions, roar! Thank you very much, comrades. Ixesha lethu alidanga kakhulu apha. Manithathe elithuba ngoku. Ndibize usihlalo wephondo azokwamkela wonke umuntu olapha. Ndizayenza ke lento sihlalo ikhawuleze ngokohlobo ndizayenza ngalo ungekasuka apho into yoba xa ugqiba ukwamkela abantu ube sosazisa umongameli ukwenzela uba umongameli angaphakanyiswa ndim aphakanyiswe ngusuka pha azothetha apha emva kwakho mna ndibuye emveni koba umongameli ethethile. Emazweni yo ayo bakhalangayo ANC ANC Hikosatu Mandla awethu Viva ANC, viva. Long live the spirit of Mama Maxeke, long live. Long live the undying spirits, Mama Maxeke, long live. Thank you very much, program directors, Comrade Mvoko and Comrade Tikana Glotiwe, the ANC chaplains led by Umfundisi Umandini with a prayer. Ubukumkani bamahahabe obukhoyo phakathi kwethu. The President of the African National Congress, Comrade President Cyril Ramaphosa, the National Executive Committee members led by the NEC deployees in our province, as Koyo, we've got quite a number of them. The members of our 8th Provincial Executive Committee, the leadership of our Revolutionary Alliance, the leadership of the Women's League, led by our President of the Women's League, the ANC Youth League Task Team members present, led by the National Convener, Comrade Nongceba Mhlauli, the Vice Chancellor of our University of Fort Beaufort, Professor Buhlungu, members of the ANC and Mass Democratic Movement, members of Charlotte Maxeke family, members of the media, and all those in attendance. Allow me to bring you heartfelt and warm revolutionary greetings on behalf of our people, of our province, and the entire membership of the African National Congress in the Eastern Cape Province, the home of legends. Let me also take this opportunity to welcome you to this important memorial lecture of one of the most outstanding revolutionaries this movement has ever produced, Umama President Charlotte Mannya Maxeke. Our National Liberation Movement is a transformed organization. It is today because of a woman like Umama Maxeke, who fought against a then patriarchal organization which did not accept women within its membership and leadership ranks. Today we pay homage to the legacy of Umama Maxeke, who would have turned 150 years this year had she still been alive. We do this, Comrade President, in the way that we honor the struggle icons and those that fought for freedom by having programs that are meant to bring change to the lives of our people and development in our communities. That is why our program today was preceded by a handover of Mama Maxeke legacy projects by our government in recognition of the life and times Mama Maxeke lived and sacrifices she made in the liberation struggle.
In the province, Comrade President, we are moving away from the traditional way of commemoration and by ensuring that we leave behind a meaningful impact in the communities where we hold our commemorative programs. Today we began our day by handing over tractors, fodder production inputs, and fertilizers to deserving beneficiaries in the Lower Blinkwater village, Phaya eGqugesi. We supported a recycling and a waste management youth cooperatives and funded the Masbambane Home for Disabled Children. We handed over wheelchairs to deserving beneficiaries in the area and provided support to youth-owned butchery establishment. We're also rolling out our en masse and viral advocacy campaign aimed at building a strong spirit of resilience among the poor, the vulnerable, and the marginalized groups of our people in the province in response to the effects of COVID-19 pandemic. Bonile President Amanana Sesezansi, I've seen the stats as well today. In the last 24 hours, we just had 20 new infections. I think the situation is still under relatively control. All this work is done in memory and commemoration of the legacy of Umama, President Maxeke, who was a symbol of bravery, resilience, faith, optimism, and triumph in the face of adversity. President, the commemoration of Mama Maxeke will be meaningless if we don't intensify our struggle to transform our society and build the country we want. The ultimate price paid by Solomon Mahlangu and the pain and suffering families such as the Vulindlela family suffered when they had 5 of its members who were hung by the illegitimate regime on the same day with Solomon Mahlangu would be in vain if we don't grow and transform our economy and serve the people. Our recognition of the life and times of Mama Maxeke will be a leap service if we do not deepen and advance the struggle to democratize gender relations in society and workplace, as well as in our movement. We cannot proudly commemorate Mama Maxeke if we lead a society wherein women live in fear mainly because of men. It is an indictment to memory of Mama Maxeke to still hear stories of gruesome crimes and reports of gender-based violence and femicide in our province and our country. All necessary actions and steps must be taken to ensure that we eliminate perpetrators of gender-based violence and femicide in our society in order to end the scourge that we all regard as a pandemic in our country. Mongameli, I would have misrepresented our province if I did not use this opportunity to express our unwavering support and commitment to the program of unity and renewal of our movement. As a province, we made significant progress in leading this program, including the work we did of uniting the MK-MVA and MK Council in the province as resolved by our National Alliance Council. President Sabamba Tina Apa Nala conference yaike abantu kusiwa eMorogoro. So when the discussion was here towards Nazareth, we even went to that kind of a meeting that we held with everyone was speaking out under one roof to say we must rebuild the African National Congress together. Here, Comrade President, we have made it clear that our province has absolutely no room for disruptors and those that are hell-bent in sowing divisions within our ranks. While we rigorously work for the unity of our movement, we are unequivocal that such unity cannot be with wedge drivers and negative tendencies that undermine the unity, cohesion, values, and principles of our movement. Here we have no confusion to understand that the ANC is a voluntary organization and is open to all those who accept its aims and objectives as well as its decisions. President, we can state with conviction that our province is more united and cohesive than it was when you addressed our provincial conference in 2017. This is because since our election, we took decisions that are in the best interest of the organization and our people. And even now, we have made it clear that the fact that our term is coming to an end will not stop us as this PEC from taking decisions that are in the interest of the organization, the revolution, and the people of our province. We commit, President, as we did at that conference, that the 9th Provincial Conference will be characterized by maximum unity, discipline, festival of ideas, not festival of chairs, robust and tolerant engagements. As I conclude, Mr. President, I wish to remind us of the days wherein our movement was confronted by what our party referred to as an enemy hidden under the same color. And this is an important exercise because, as the saying goes, the more things change, the more they stay the same. In its Central Committee statement and in describing the activities of the so-called Gang of Eight, which were expelled by the movement, the party had this to say, and I quote, "The West drivers who had been working behind closed doors against the whole liberation movement and its policies have come out into open. They are part of the impure load which every revolution carries, and when the load is thrown aside, the journey of victory is always a swifter one," close quote. President, as painful the exercise can be, what is undoubted is that we cannot advance, deepen, and defend our national democratic revolution with impure load within our ranks. We cannot coexist with wrongdoing in the organization and all these negative tendencies confronting our organization today. This is why, as the ANC in the Eastern Cape, we have agreed that the fight against corruption and corporate capture of the state must be fought relentlessly and won. We have agreed that amongst the agent task of our movement is defeating the tendency of organized groupings and factions within the ANC, including the group masquerading as RET but operating as a splinter formation within our organization. For this, President, you and the entire NEC collective have our full and unwavering support as this province. Thank you very much, and again, we warmly welcome you and all the leadership in attendance from the national down to the lowest structure, as well as the family. Let me, President, invite you to deliver the lecture to people of South Africa and those who are joining us across the globe. Thank you very much. Over to you, Mr. President.
Kazima libongwe igama lamakhosi libongwe Amandla. Viva ANC, viva. Program directors, distinguished leadership of Fort Hare University and Wilberforce, the Mannya and the Maxeke families, Premier of the Eastern Cape, Comrade Oscar Mabuyane, members of the National Executive Committee of the African National Congress who are here, President of the ANC Women's League, Comrade Bathabile Dlamini, and other leaders of the ANC Women's League, both at national as well as at provincial and regional level, the newly installed committee of the ANC Youth League that is meant to lead the revival of the African National Congress Youth League, members of the Provincial Executive Committee of the ANC, as well as the regional leadership, the leadership of alliance structures, as well as leaders of the broader democratic movement, the religious leaders, amakhosi ethu, the students, comrades and friends, and fellow South Africans. I'd like to thank the University of Fort Hare and Umama
Charlotte Maxeke's alma mater, Wilberforce University, for organizing this lecture alongside the ANC Women's League as well. I'd like to thank also the leadership of the ANC in this province, and indeed the Women's League, for a most wonderful program that they organized for us earlier today, where we paid homage to the life of Umama Charlotte Maxeke at the place where she was born and grew up. And I also like to thank our comrades in the leadership of government here for putting together an innovative idea of memorializing a leader who played such an important role in the development of our country and leading us to the democracy that we enjoy today. In 3 weeks' time from now, we will celebrate National Freedom Day in honor of the events of the 27th of April 1994. Freedom Day and Freedom Month is a time when we affirm the apex values of our Constitution, values of human dignity, the achievement of equality, and the advancement of human rights and freedoms in our country. It is also a time to reflect on the solid foundation laid by those who came before us, the giants of our struggle and movement on whose shoulders we stand today. Today, today marks 150 years since the birth of Umama, Dr. Charlotte Maxeke. It is truly a rare moment to celebrate the life of someone who was born almost 40 years before the formation of the African National Congress. If the formation of the ANC in 1912 was a defining moment for our country, the life and the leadership of Charlotte Maxeke was an inspiration to many people in our country and continues to be precisely that. This moment gives us an opportunity to reflect on Charlotte Maxeke's life, her work, and also the times in which she lived as an African woman. It is when we look at her life against the very big canvas of the times in which she lived that we realize what a remarkable leader, a remarkable woman, and a remarkable mother that she was. We reflect on a life of an incredible woman who was a towering figure in our nation's history. And as a leader, she was well-rounded and rounded in a most remarkable way. Charlotte Maxeke lived during a period when women in our country were regarded as minors and were denied opportunities to be educated, let alone to lead anything or to be leaders. It was a time when women were massively oppressed and exploited. Despite all these impediments and obstacles, Charlotte Maxeke rose above the challenges that were present during the time when she lived. Her determination to succeed saw her gaining an education and becoming an educator, a missionary, a social worker, an activist, a communist, and an anti-colonial campaigner. Her activism turned her into, yes, a trade unionist as well. A trade unionist who actively campaigned against low wages for black workers and who was part of the formation of the mighty and gigantic Industrial Commercial Union, the ICU. She was a champion for gender equality and one of the organizers of the anti-pass movement. This was a rare thing to have women leading such great movements at the time. It was also a very dangerous time for women to lead. In 1918, she formed the Bantu Women's League, the forerunner to today's ANC Women's League. So in a way, Comrade Bathabile Dlamini, she was your president even in 1918. In that same year, she led a delegation to the then Prime Minister, Louis Botha, to demand the abolition of passes and was part of anti-pass protests a year later. And these activities were precursors to the 1956 Women's March. She was also a public intellectual. Her output in the form of articles, of pamphlets, and representations and writings to panels and commissions lent empirical weight to her activism. In many ways, she was not just an armchair activist. She was a well-read activist and political leader who wrote, who reflected on issues much more than many of us do today. If she were around, I have no doubt that she would be teaching all of us the art of writing, the art of putting on paper our ideas, our concepts, our ideology, and everything that we believe in. She was published at a time when the voices of black women were being shut down and silenced. In publications like Umthetheli Wabantu, she wrote in isiXhosa on the so-called women question and called for women's social and political rights to not be neglected during the anti-colonial struggles. She was one of many leaders who were not only literate, but who propagated the values and the principles of our movement in their published writings. This is a lesson we all need to learn from and emulate, I would say, from today. In his 1930 biography of her, titled "What an Educated African Girl Can Do," Dr. Alfred B. Xuma wrote, "I regard Mrs. Maxeke as a pioneer in one of the greatest of human causes, working under extraordinary difficult circumstances to lead a people in the face of prejudice, not only against her race, but against her sex." Close quotes. It was from Wilberforce University that she graduated with a BSc in 1903, becoming the very first black South African woman to get a university degree. And as I said earlier today, and it was just not a Mickey Mouse degree. it was a Bachelor of Science degree, a serious degree. I'm not downplaying those who get other degrees, including my own degree. I got a law degree, but I'd like to believe she got a higher degree. There can be no doubt that much of who she would become was shaped by her exposure at Wilberforce to currents, to trends, and to ideologies like socialism, class struggle, Pan-Africanism, and the new Negro movement. Umamo Charlotte Maxeke initially entered academia to prepare for life as a missionary in Africa, but during her studies, she came to appreciate the international character of the struggle against racism and colonialism, and that expanded her worldview. She was taught by the legendary sociologist, historian, and activist and Pan-Africanist W.E.B. Du Bois. They continued to correspond over the years, even after she returned to South Africa. In their letters between herself and W.E.B. Du Bois, they discussed how to mobilize around upcoming Pan-African conferences and meetings. This immediately showed her Pan-Africanist character. This is an aspect of her legacy that is often not given due recognition. Like her contemporaries, Pixlika Isaka Seme, John Langalibalele Dube, Alfred B. Kluma, and others, Charlotte Maxeke was a progressive internationalist and a Pan-Africanist at that, long before liberation movements around the world adopted these two concepts, internationalism and Pan-Africanism, as their doctrines. Charlotte Maxeke and Du Bois also spent time discussing education as a vehicle of national development. This is particularly important to today's theme of women in academia in the 105th year of Charlotte Maxeke. Charlotte and her husband, Dr. Marshall Maxeke, founded the Wilberforce Institute in Everton in Gauteng that is still standing till today. Over the years, they did important work in primary and secondary education. And I want to speak briefly about their union, their wonderful marriage, because it offers valuable insights. Theirs was a partnership rooted in intellectual and professional respect for one another, something that was very rare at the time. And may I say something that you still find very rare even today. They worked together as missionaries, but more importantly, also as educators. They also co-parented their child, an unusual type of thing at the time. They shared the parenting duties. Ubaba Marshall Maxeke was known to be so deeply immersed in doing household chores, looking after their child. On an equal basis, they were able to work as a couple in their household, looking after their children. In reflecting on this, we come to understand that even though patriarchy may be a dominant current in a society, it should not be that it is surrendered to. Today we have patriarchy as one of the dominant behavioral traits that men resort to. Men can and must lead by example in treating women equally, and that should begin at home. And that is where Charlotte Maxeke and Marshall Maxeke's marriage teaches us a wonderful lesson about the partnership between two people who were intellectuals and educators as well. Xa ungayenzi ekhaya qala ngoku ukufunda kuCharlotte Maxeke noMarshall Maxeke. Charlotte was particularly passionate about the education of women. For her, education was that critical ingredient for the all-round development of women. As the constitution of the ANC Women's League describes it. She believed that one should uplift one another. She once said, "This work is not for yourselves. Kill that spirit of self and do not live above your people, but live with them. And if you can rise, bring someone with you." And I'm so glad that this is like the motto that the ANC Women's League has now appropriated onto itself. This is a sentiment that the ANC continues to affirm in its policies, as well as in the programs of the government that it leads. 27 years into democracy, we have made significant strides in closing the gender parity in education. The strides we have made would have pleased Charlotte Maxeke. With regards to primary education, we're finding that 86% of girls attend primary school, and data from the Department of Basic Education indicates that the girls are also more likely to finish schools. Of last year's matriculation results, more girls attained bachelor's and diploma passes, as well as passes with distinction. They didn't only end there, but bafumana distinction. Girls also produce more passes in the department's second chance matric programs. Yeah? On equitable access to higher education, we are also doing well comparatively. Women account for 59% of student headcount enrollments at South African universities, and of these, the majority are African women. This is what Charlotte would have been pleased about. As we came in, I was asking a good professor about the gender mix of the students here. And he immediately said the majority students they have here, 57% are women. So women are on the rise. According to the 2018 data from the National Research Foundation, women accounted for 75% of headcount enrollment in education, 63% in humanities and social sciences, as well as 57% in business and commerce. So they are advancing and getting into your more difficult areas, as well as advancing, getting into that Bachelor of Science degree that is so rarefied that Charlotte Maxeke excelled in. In the basic education sphere, though more girls enroll for mathematics than boys, boys perform better than girls. But I'm saying this so that we can encourage more girl children to enroll more and more in mathematics so that they can follow in Charlotte Maxeke's footsteps. We must lend our support to increase the participation of girls in mathematics, in science, as well as in technology fields. This should be a strategy that includes setting participation and performance targets, to have support programs for girl learners, and we must promote their participation in things like maths Olympiads and competitions, but we must also support them with bursaries so that they can be high-performing young people. We must also look at what systems are in place to alleviate the burden of responsibilities women postgraduates carry, and to what extent this prevents them from reaching doctoral level, because we are still lacking in the number of women at the doctoral level. As an ANC government, we have to look at the discrimination practices within academia itself, such as the lack of adequate advancement opportunities for women and pay disparities between male and female academics. As we have done so as an organization, we must continue to loudly demonstrate our intolerance to the terrible practice of sex for marks that turns universities and colleges into dens of exploitation of young female students. I mention this because it happens, and this must be brought to a stop. This is not limited to places of higher learning. Girls in school are more likely to experience sexual harassment and sexual assault, including from their own teachers. As is already being done through the National Strategic Plan to combat gender-based violence and femicide, we must work harder to make places of learning safe for women and free from violence. We must continue to work with communities to overcome discriminatory practices, like taking young girls out of school early to work in the home, to care for the sick, family members or so, and to prepare them for marriage. This is what Charlotte Maxeke would have been opposed to. There is indeed much work to be done still, much as we have made progress. But it does not detract from our great sense of pride at the greater representation of women in professional fields compared to what they were during Charlotte Maxeke's time. The progressive and pro-women policies of the ANC and its government continue to level the playing field for women, enabling them to take their rightful place across society. This is in no small part due to the activism of the ANC Women's League and a number of other women's organizations. The ANC Women's League continues to play an important role in advocating for the rights of women, both inside and outside of the organization. Women's rights and gender equality has been mainstreamed. It is no longer a source of wonderment to see a woman minister, a woman CEO, or a woman postgraduate, as it was during Charlotte Maxeke's time. As we celebrate her, we also salute her altruistic spirit. When she climbed the ladder of success, she did not pull it down so that those who come after her should not climb as well. When she was a student at Wilberforce, she arranged opportunities for other African students to study there. The ladder was left beneath so that its steps could be ascended by the next generation. Not only did her example inspire activists like Sibusisiwe Makhanya Bertha Gqowa, and many others, she also lured many other young women to climb the ladder of academia. The task before us now is to harness the potential of higher education for the advancement of women, who make up more than half of our society or population. Women's education must play a greater role in supporting our national development, particularly in the post-COVID-19 period. Last week, the World Economic Forum published its annual Gender Gap Report. It ranks 156 countries based on gender disparities in economic participation and opportunity, as well as educational attainment, health and survival, and political empowerment. We have fared well in some areas of economic participation and opportunity, including labor force participation and the number of female professionals and technical workers. In the latter category, we actually came number one, with 53% of such workers being female who are put into those important positions. In areas such as wage equality, for similar work, we've done less well. And this is also a burning matter in the ANC. And this is what we now need to address earnestly. I find the practice of unequal pay for women for equal work with male quite offensive, and would like this practice to be banned and to be legislated against. We cannot have a situation where women are paid far less or even less than men for exactly the same amount of work that they do. It must be banned. According to the report, the economic downturn brought about by the pandemic has impacted women more severely than men, as we've often said. It has also set back gender parity by as much as a decade. This means we have even much harder work to do in the post-COVID-19 era. On the issue of broadening access to education for women, we should be leading, and we should also ensure that women play a leading role in academia, in business, as well as in government. Women's education must play a catalytic role in their economic empowerment, which is a long-standing objective of our movement and the government that it leads. We will continue to forge ahead with empowering the women of our country economically through a variety of programs and activities, through the co-ops that they participate in, through the various companies that they set up. It is women-led and women-owned businesses that must participate in the various aspects of our recovery program, whether it is in infrastructure, whether it is in food production, whether it is in any field. The women of our country must be given that opportunity to lead. It is also women-owned businesses that should take advantage of support and training opportunities currently underway to enable them to participate in public procurement. As we know, last year we announced that 40% of public procurement will be set aside for women-owned businesses. It is women, especially young women, who must take up opportunities provided through the Presidential Employment Stimulus Program as well. Women academics must also be at the forefront of research and inquiry into the pressing social problems of our day. Research that will guide our national response to pressing issues such as poverty, inequality, and underdevelopment. And it is women who must take their rightful place in the political life of our country as well. Fulfilling our promises to our people calls for capable, ethical, and competent cadres at the helm. We have many such women leaders in our organization. To capacitate women, we must deal decisively with the residues of patriarchy that, yes, we still find even in our own movement. We must get rid of conservative attitudes and chauvinism that restrain women in the structures of our own movement. A degree certificate hanging on the wall should never be seen as the end of the line. And Charlotte Maxeke never saw her BSc degree from Wilberforce University as the end of the line. Were this the case, Umama Maxeke would have returned home to South Africa and settled down to a quiet life. Instead, she headed straight to the trenches of the struggle. Through the Bantu Women's League, she fought for the rights of women, particularly the demeaning practice of white employers forcing black women to undergo medical examinations before being employed. She was an agitator of political reform and attended, as we well know, the 1912 launch of the South African National Native Congress, the forerunner to our movement, the ANC. She was the only woman in attendance, showing just how determined she was to see that women's voices should be heard. It wasn't the first time either that Umama Charlotte Maxeke had forced her way into male-only political gatherings, something the young people of today call gate-crushing. An article published recently by the journalist Zubaydah Jaffer talks about the so-called Lezziton Incident in mid-1902. This was when Umama Maxeke traveled to the annual meeting of the South African Native Convention near Queenstown. Ms. Jaffer is the author of Beauty of the Heart, coincidentally, and sadly one of the only biographies of Umama Charlotte Maxeke. Apparently, Umama Charlotte caused quite a stir when she got to that meeting. She was the only woman in attendance and demanded clarity on the purpose and objectives of the conference and whether women could take part or not. In what could be called true Congress style, a committee was nominated to respond to her. See, when we've run out of ideas and we're not able to respond, we set up a committee. Let's have a committee to look at this. And yet it was such a simple and straightforward matter that needed attention there and then. But we set up a committee, and that committee would have a subcommittee, and that subcommittee would have a task force, and that one would have another formation as well. The matter was tabled, and she was subsequently told the time was not right for women to take part. And the committee also said it was advisable for women to form their own movements. Of course, as history bears witness, she did just that. Umama Maxeke also took up the cause of non-racialism in the early stages of our movement's existence. She took part and led in activities with women of all races united to the cause of gender equality. Non-racialism in the women's movement was strong in our history, from the 1956 Women's March to the formation of the Women's National Convention in 1992. Unfortunately, The same cannot be said of the present day, just broadly across our movement. As we witness the concept of non-racialism being undermined, including, as I said, within our own movement, this is something we should actively guard against, not just as the ANC, but as a nation as well. Our country was founded in pursuit of non-racialism. The rise of various forms of chauvinism is something we should all be against, because non-racialism is the glue that binds us together as a nation. Worker rights was another cause that Charlotte Maxeke took up. In the 1920s, she campaigned against labor conditions for black workers and would go to the establishments of the employment agencies for Africans in 1928. Her passion for education led her to be called to testify at a government commission on African education, which was a first for an African to be called to a commission like that. She was also the first black woman to become a juvenile parole officer. The Cape Argus had these powerful words to say of her social work activities at the time. They said, open quotes, educated to take her place with the highest, she devoted herself to the lowest and most miserable, close quotes. That was Charlotte Maxeke. Charlotte Maxeke was also a trailblazer in another important aspect, and that she affirmed the value of and respect for traditional leadership. It was respect she was granted in return. The positive work being done by her and her husband came to the attention of Ukumkani Sabata Dalindyebo, who invited them to take charge of his private school. During this time, she participated in the King's Court, something completely unheard of at the time for a woman. In his biography, Dr. Xuma relates that she was renowned for her courage as well as eloquence, and was even given the name Nogazo as a salutation. There is indeed much we can learn and we can say about the life and times of Charlotte Maxeke. Just as she brought her education to bear to change society, so too must greater study opportunities for women yield positive outcomes for our country. Time and again, and throughout the course of history, women have proven that if just given an opportunity to better themselves, the benefits are multiplied, not sevenfold, not twofold, but multiple of times fold. That is what happens with women. Better educated women isn't only to create more breadwinners or to expand the workforce. Better educated women means better families, better communities, and a better society. In a chapter in his biography titled, Why She Succeeds, Dr. Xuma wrote, Charlotte's success has been due to no accident of favorable circumstances. I repeat, Charlotte's success has been due to no accident of favorable circumstances. It has been due to her ability with qualities of true leadership, of which she has many. She knows that she knows, and therefore leads along definite and sound lines according to her light. to her life. That's... Now, Mama Charlotte Maxeke was a leading light who in turn gave light to others. Now, you know, in just going through the preparations for this input, I was just amazed at the measure of this lady that we're talking about today. And in a way, you could even say that maybe we've never come across a woman like Charlotte Maxeke yet. Maybe we haven't. Now, she would also have been a leading light, even today, in dealing with the challenges that we are grappling with right now. The challenges of COVID, of making sure that the infection rate in our country is brought under control, just as we are now rolling out the vaccines. I can see Mama Charlotte Maxeke would have been right at the forefront, campaigning and bringing our people together to go to the vaccination points. And yes, maybe where we make mistakes, Comrade Batabile, she would have criticized us. She would have chastised us. She would have shown us the way. She would have advised us. She would have said, Lapa President, you are making a mistake. We need people like, I need those types of women. That is what we need. She would have been actively focused on how we should also find ways of the economic recovery that we're involved in. She would have wanted us to find ways of transforming our economy. As I said, she was imaginative, she was innovative, she was reflective, and she was clever. And she would have been actively involved with us to make sure that our country gets over this COVID challenge that we are facing now. Her preoccupation would also have been around how best can we empower the women of our country. As a Pan-Africanist, she would have immersed herself in ways in which the African Continental Free Trade Area would lead to the growth of our continent's economies. But more importantly, she would have wanted to find ways. How can women of our continent and indeed our own country find ways in which they can be properly empowered through the African Continental Free Trade Area, so that this free trade area agreement should not just be a nice talking point by political leaders, but it should be something that they get deeply immersed in and empower themselves and empower their nations. When we examine Charlotte Maxeke's life, what can we say we learn? We learn from her life's work and the many roles of leadership she played that leaders must be men and women who dedicate their lives to improving the life of others. They must be organizational, and they must also be disciplined like she was. Mama Charlotte Maxeke was never indisciplined. When the organization says, this is the decision, she was not one to say, I am going to do a different thing altogether. That is how disciplined she was. And that is precisely what is needed now. And she believed that leaders must focus on serving the people rather than serving themselves. Leaders must be people who can think about their actions and the good and the damage their actions can do to the interests of the people and their organizations. Soon after the ANC-NEC declared 2021 as the year of Charlotte Maxeke, when we released the January 8th statement, I've asked myself a number of times as I was going through just the preparations for this input, what would Charlotte Maxeke have done in dealing with the challenges that we face in our movement? What I do know is that she would have been doggedly focused on the unity and the renewal of the African National Congress. She would have made it her daily task. To her, this would have meant that there should not be any form of factionalism in the organization, and she would have refused to be a member or a participant in any faction that could have come about. She would have said, anizingeni factions. Faction endingena kuyo yile ye African National Congress kuphela. What I also do know is that she was such a woman of integrity, a woman of substance, and that she would have said no to corruption. She would have said no to corruption. That is what Charlotte Maxeke would have done. Because she would have known ukuthi corruption in the African National Congress is like poison. It's like poison, and it kills. First, it will kill the organization, and then it will kill our people's appetite to support the African National Congress. And she would have refused to participate in any corruption. Umama Charlotte Maxeke was a leader who was imaginative, and she always reflected on issues of the time, both in her own country as well as on the African continent, as well as globally. She knew that leadership should be based on knowledge, on competence, and experience, and dedication, and hard work. As we keep her legacy flame burning bright, let it illuminate and allow to emerge. We must allow many more Charlotte Maxekes to emerge. Men and women must come to the fore and say, Ndimlo or Charlotte Maxeke. That's what we should all be doing. It is now up to the new generation of women activists to take forward the struggle for the full emancipation of women in the cause of a better South Africa. Umama Charlotte laid the foundation. We now need people who will finish the job. I speak particularly of those in the ranks of the ANC Women's League Young Women's Desk and the newly formed ANC Youth League National Task Team. Because you are the future. They are the future. Umama Charlotte Maxeke was the future of her time, and we've now had to take the baton from her. We are counting on the young people of our country to complete what Umama Charlotte Maxeke started. It is a cause that can no longer be deferred. As W.E.B. Du Bois said, it is today that we fit ourselves for the greater usefulness of tomorrow. Today is the seed time. Now are the hours of work, and tomorrow comes the harvest, close quotes. This great woman and many other great women like her were that seed. They were the seed. I speak here of women like Umama Lilian Ngoyi, Albertina Sisulu, Helen Joseph, uBetha Gqowa, uWinnie Madikizela-Mandela, and many others. They were the seed, and we saw the harvest that they brought home. Let us indeed work to develop this generation's women and harness the reaping of the seed. Let the multitudes of Charlotte Maxeke's rise and come to the fore. This is where the poem that I used in the State of the Nation, Ega Maya Angelou, comes to mind. I rise, and we want to see many Charlotte Maxeke's rising and rising amongst the young people of our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Comrade President. Thank you very much once again, Comrade President. There are three things that are going to take place at the same time. But before we can do that, I would like to request Comrade Hlengiwe Mkhize. Comrade Prof, you must come and say thank you very much to all of these people here. Thereafter, we are going to celebrate Sawusika Ikhekhe esihlalo. Uzawuchaza umuntu ozasikhokhela ekusikeni ikhekhe. Comrade Prof.
Mr. President, firstly, I would like to build on the our chairperson, to acknowledge all the structures. Thank you very much, Mr. Premier. But I also ready to say, Mr. President, before we thank you, I want to thank the PEC, the Eastern Cape. Comrades, you lead us with pride. I'm saying this on behalf of NEC employees. Whenever we come to your extended PEC or recruiter or whether it's a planning session, we really come out with the feeling that you are a coherent structure, you are a leadership that is standing together and in the trenches to pursue our project of unity and renewal. So today, again, you have shown how you operate. Because from where we were on, see, Alveda Iplatamama, one could see Uba, Abstinence infection up. Una leaders from different structures. You have really taken the ANC back to its beginnings. You know, I always look at our NEC, Mr. President, and say, whenever you come here, whether it's a PEC or a Lefuta, but they have this clergy around them who sits throughout. And when I leave, I say, no Bishop Martin, you can't touch me. If you stay 2 or 3, they'll be there almost every day, even on a Sunday. Can you understand? So, we really appreciate it all the time, and it's an inspiration. It's encouraging, it's helping the leadership of the province to focus